Well, two more women have come forward saying former Vice President Joe Biden touched them in ways that made them feel uncomfortable. One of the women says that Biden rested her hand on her thigh, even as she squirmed to show some discomfort. She said Biden hugged her, and I'm quoting here, just a little bit too long at an event on sexual assault. And she says that the incident was particularly uncomfortable because she had just shared her own story on sexual assault. Well, the other says that Biden put his hand on her shoulder, and when she posed to take a photo at a Minneapolis fundraising event and started dropping it down her back until her husband actually intervened. These allegations have raised new questions about what this would mean for Biden if he were to enter the 2020 race. Yesterday, President Trump weighed in during a speech to congressional Republicans.
It looks like the only non-sort of heavy socialist, he's being taken care of pretty well by the socialists they got to him. Our former vice president, I was going to call him, I don't know him well, I was going to say, welcome to the world, Joe. You having a good time, Joe? I was told that it would take at least 2 years from 1 month ago to get the caliphate at 100%. But I went to Iraq and I met the generals, and one general said, sir, we can do it in 1 week. My people tell me 2 years. What do you think? 1 week, sir. I said, General, come here, give me a kiss. I felt like Joe Biden. Yeah.
Well, joining me now from outside the National Action Network convention in Times Square, CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns, and joining us from D.C., Washington Post national political correspondent James Hohmann. So, you know, what's interesting about this is President Trump's assertion that Biden is being taken care of by the socialists. I mean, it kind of seems to match up with what's coming from Biden's own advisors. Axios reported that several around Biden think that advisors to Bernie Sanders might be at least partially behind this anti-Biden campaign. James, any evidence to back up that idea?
No, and the Sanders folks deny it. We obviously, Lucy Flores, who wrote the first piece that started a lot of this, was a Bernie Sanders supporter. But she's also said that it's time for a woman president in 2020. And the Sanders folks, again, saying it's not coming from them. And obviously, multiple women now coming forward that aren't in any way tied to the Sanders campaign. Obviously, the rival campaigns are eager to sort of highlight ways that Biden may be out of step with today's Democratic Party as he prepares to get in. And what Biden advisors tell us is that this really hasn't affected his calculus. So if it is an effort to dissuade him from getting in, Biden telling allies and aides full steam ahead.
You know, James, over the weekend when the story first broke, we looked up her name and her background. We were familiar with her, but she did show up on Bernie Sanders' website for fundraising. What do you make of that?
Yeah, well, she was a Bernie Sanders supporter. She ran for lieutenant governor in 2014. She supported Bernie strongly in Nevada in 2016, where the Nevada caucuses were very competitive. But just because she's telling her story, and I'm not defending Bernie Sanders or her, but just because she's telling her story doesn't mean that someone is putting her up to it,
right,
or circulating it. She wrote it on her own and put it up on New York Magazine's website.
Yeah, Caitlin, I'm curious, what do the other 2020 contenders have to say about this?
You know, it's interesting. They're trying to strike a delicate balance between calling for either Joe Biden to apologize or kind of not really saying much about what he should do, but also trying to say that these women's voices should be heard, they should be believed. You know, I asked Beto O'Rourke, who was here at the conference earlier this morning, what he made of the allegations against the former vice president. Here's what he had to say.
I think we need to listen to those who are raising their stories, who have the courage to come forward, to share their experience, and also to be part of the conversation about either his candidacy or how he fares as a contender for the nomination if he jumps in. So I think ultimately that's going to be a decision for him to make. But I'm glad that people are willing to and have the courage to step up. They must be heard and listened to, and that must all be part of
So you heard there from Beto O'Rourke, which was very interesting because I can tell you from following his campaign, I was with him in New Hampshire a couple of weeks ago, and he was very effusive in his praise of Joe Biden. When he was asked by voters whether Biden should get into the race, Beto O'Rourke said, sure, he should. But Biden is such a beloved figure in the party. But that comment from O'Rourke just there shows kind of this fine line that candidates are walking. And we should also note that there were lots of criticisms of Biden coming in to this race before these allegations were even made. There were these big questions about where he fit into a Democratic Party that had changed so much since he first entered it and really changed in the past couple of years in this Me Too era. And so candidates are having this conversation about how to respond to these kinds of things. And Democrats are facing really their own reckoning on this issue, establishing a moral high ground with the ousting of Al Franken, but also noting that there are a lot of gray areas, and Biden is experiencing that right now.
James, I want to ask you about your newsletter today. Speaking of a candidate's past, in your newsletter, you focus on a candidate whose past has actually helped him. Your latest edition, you say Bernie Sanders might be, and I'm quoting here, the only Democrat running for president who doesn't need to pander to the left to be able to win the nomination. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, so Caitlin's at this cattle call, as everyone sort of calls these gatherings where, 7, 8 presidential candidates all show up. And basically all of them seem eager to tell audiences what they want to hear. And there are all these sort of new litmus tests, purity tests that weren't really issues at all in 2016, but have now become kind of cause celebs on the left, where liberal activists want candidates to say they're going to abolish the Electoral College or pay reparations to descendants of slavery or, get rid of the legislative filibuster, pack the Supreme Court, grow it to 15 seats maybe. And a lot of candidates are saying, yeah, let's do all those things. Bernie Sanders, not one of them. And it's because he has a lot of credibility with the base, because no one doubts that Bernie Sanders is an authentic liberal because of the 2016 experience. He's at the top, near the top of the pack in the polls. He doesn't need to pander. He doesn't need to take sort of out there positions in terms of new issues to break through and get our attention. And so kind of Bernie, really, when you look at the whole field right now, he's the one candidate who's done the least to pander to the kind of the far left of the Democratic Party this year.
So, Caitlin, at what point do you feel like, for so long it seemed like everyone was kind of waiting to find out about Joe Biden? Does at some point potentially Bernie Sanders fill that void?
Well, this is the thing about the Democratic primary right now, that there is no real frontrunner. This week, we are looking at the money being raised. Remember, the first quarter closed, and now candidates are starting to report their fundraising numbers. I think that gives us a really good indication, at least at this point in time, where the energy and momentum is behind some of these candidates. Bernie Sanders announcing yesterday that he raised $18 million. He has a grassroots army, but he's still not resonating as high as he potentially could be in the polls. If you look at 2016 and how he did there, he's not getting that same number in terms of support, but that's because there are so many candidates in this race. So that's the question that I'm wondering for Sanders is, does this coalition that he built in 2016 stand with him throughout this primary process? We are seeing the momentum on the money level, certainly, and he has a lot of money to stay in this race, but other candidates are having this kind of why not me moment. And it's very interesting that even the former vice president, Joe Biden, given how popular he still is in the party, wasn't able to clear this field. And a lot of candidates are saying that they have a chance to at least make a statement. Now, it's also important to note that this is all about delegates at the end of the day, and they're awarded proportionately. So there is an extra incentive for candidates to stay in and collect some of these delegates and to have a say in the party eventually.
So we've talked about momentum and money and fundraising. James, I want to talk about the issues for a second. Julian Castro put out an extensive immigration plan yesterday. It's actually one of the first for the Democratic field. What's in this plan?
Yeah, it's, Kamala Harris put out a plan today, too. All of the candidates are sort of facing pressure to not just say they're against what Trump is doing, but to say what they're for. The Castro plan is comprehensive. He was the former mayor of San Antonio, Housing and Urban Development Secretary. It's the obvious stuff like a pathway to citizenship for people who are undocumented immigrants, protecting the dreamers. And then there's a lot of kind of more sophisticated policy ideas. One of the kind of some things that for Democrats seem like no-brainers, making sure that troops, people who serve, who aren't U.S. citizens, aren't deported, which the Trump administration has been doing. So really going through and proactively laying out new ideas. And I hear from a couple of the other campaigns, they're putting the finishing touches on their own immigration plans to roll out in the coming days and weeks.
And do you get the sense that immigration is really an issue that Castro wants to make a backbone of his campaign?
Yeah, he's the Latino candidate in the race. He spends a lot of time talking about the border. I was with him in Iowa this past weekend, and he was joking about how the Mexican food in Iowa is better than he expected coming from San Antonio. He sort of has leaned very hard into being the first potential Hispanic president, and has made immigration a centerpiece of his campaign. At one point, Beto said something like, "I'm the only Texan in the race," and Castro and his team were saying, "What about us? We're also from Texas. We're also from a border state. We understand these issues too." When O'Rourke was talking about being from El Paso, which is obviously right on the border with Ciudad Juarez.
Yeah, I will tell you, when I was a Middle East correspondent, he came to Jerusalem once, very early on in his political career, and I told him there was no good Tex-Mex in the entire country of Israel. And opportunity missed, is what I will say. He didn't take me up on that. Sorry for the country of Israel. It could have been a good
That's
opportunity.
awesome.
Yeah. I want to thank you both for joining us. James Hohmann and Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, coming up, Virginia's Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax says that the sexual accusations against him are not true.